Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail today. We are going to share camping encounter horror stories. Camping alone can be terrifying, especially when something's hunting you. The screams echoed through the trees. I couldn't tell if they were human or animal. All I knew was they were loud, which meant they were close. As I listened to the high-pitched shrieks, it almost sounded like a couple of people having a shouting match. If I had been at my apartment in town, that's exactly what I would have thought the sound was. But then the pitch changed, and it took on a feral quality. I knew whoever or whatever was making the sound. I wanted nothing to do with them. Thinking you're alone in the wilderness is one thing. It gives a certain freeing feeling like you're so close to nature. But knowing you're alone and hearing the terrifying, nearly indescribable sound sent chills down my spine. I quickly questioned how much longer I would be alone or alive. Did those things know I was here? Were they planning their attack? Or was it just a gathering of something like a harmless chill session? In the woods, in the dead of night? Survival instinct was screaming for me to get out of there as quickly as possible. To hell with the tent and my supplies. Just leave. For a brief moment, I nearly listened. Later, I would wish I had. Fortunately, I hadn't made a fire yet and decided against one now. If by some miracle those things didn't know I was here, a fire would draw them in like flies to, well, something I didn't want to be in. Even though the screaming was still going at a fever pitch, I quietly snuck into my tent and zipped it shut, as if some flimsy material would magically keep at bay whatever beasts were raging out there. Searching through my pack, I found my Swiss Army knife and kept it firm in my grasp as I lay down on my sleeping bag. I didn't dare settle in for the night. Sleeping through being attacked by wild whatevers and torn to shreds can be bad for my health. As I lay there, eyes wide, listening to the horrible shrieks that seemed to come from everywhere, they suddenly stopped. At first, this was a relief, but when the sounds stopped, so did all other noises of the forest. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on all of nature. I heard a loud thumping sound that sounded like drums beating faster and faster until I realized it was my heart. Trying to calm myself so I didn't have a heart attack on the spot was a challenge. I tried to think of calm blue oceans and sunrises, of beautiful things that had nothing to do with the situation I was in. Apparently, I did my job too well. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in a panic. Jumping up, I looked all around for the beasts that were coming to get me. When all that stared back at me were the contents of my backpack and the four walls of the tent, I allowed myself to take a few deep breaths. It was morning. The sun was up, and the birds were singing. I took both of those as good signs. Being alive was a bonus as well. It was decision time. Do I pack up and cut my trip short by 2 days? Or do I write off last night's incident as a rare occurrence and not worry about it today in the daylight as the sun's rays bathe me in warmth? It's funny how fear manifests itself so much stronger at night. Last night the forest seemed like the most horrifying place I'd ever been. Today it looks like all the beauty of nature is spread out before me. I couldn't imagine anything bad happening in such a picturesque place. As I looked out over the clearing in the woods, I saw a large dark spot that was moving towards me. I dove into my tent and emerged with a pair of binoculars. Peering through them, I saw the spot was a bear, and it was headed my way. So much for nothing bad happening in nature. My plan of action was to hide and hope it went away or turn down another path before it got here. That plan didn't work out so well. Within 15 minutes, I could hear it snuffling around the campsite looking for something to eat. I hoped it wouldn't be eating fresh camper. The can of bear spray was firmly in my hand with my white knuckles clenching it. Having it was one thing. Using it was another. That was my last resort. Spray and run. The sniffing got louder, and I could see the bottom edges of tint being pushed in by a large nose. My knuckles grew a little whiter as I followed its progress along the edge and around the tint. And then there was a pause. A dreadful pause. The kind of pause that horrible decisions are born from. I was contemplating my own horrible decision when the sniffing started again, this time leading away from the tint. Breathing a cautiously optimistic sigh of relief, I opened the tint flap just enough to see the bear lumbering off into the woods. Again, I held a silent vote, just like the song said, should I stay or should I go? I'd only been camping up here once before, but I didn't remember it being this dangerous. Maybe I just got lucky last time. Not wanting my luck to run out, I packed up my tent and got ready to leave. The sun was already high in the sky, leaving me just a few hours to hike out what took me a full day to hike in. I looked for bear tracks to see which way it had left, but the ground was dry, so there was nothing to see. Crossing my fingers, I headed out on the trail, hoping it had gone some other way. It was easy going, making the terror of last night fade even more. I still kept a wary eye for the bear, though. No use in getting so caught up in nature that I ignore her dangers. After around an hour of walking, I found a large rock on the side of the trail and decided to take a break. Pulling out a granola bar and a bottle of water, I looked around as I snacked. There was a clearing in the woods and a rough path leading to it. It wasn't any official path, just one that happens when a lot of feet go the same way and tramp down the foliage. There was a faint whiff of smoke coming from the clearing, but I couldn't see exactly what was causing it. My curiosity wanted to see what was there, but my common sense said no way. In the end, curiosity fought dirty and said the smoke meant there had been a fire and the ashes could blow into the trees if the wind picked up and cause a wildfire. It was a good point, even though the wind was uncannily still at the moment. I took a quick look around to make sure the bear wasn't sneaking up on me, then started down the narrow path. The trees blocked out some of the light as I headed down the path toward the clearing, making me literally descend into darkness. It wasn't a good feeling. My eyes darted around, looking for anything out of the ordinary, and I slowed my pace. Then suddenly the trees opened up and daylight shone brightly on the clearing and the remnants of a fire with a wisp of smoke still rising. Whoever had made it had been dangerously uncaring about the safety of the woods. The fire sat right in the middle of a patch of grass, with no ring of stones surrounding it. My ire rose at the carelessness of this person. I found myself wishing very bad things on them when I noticed something else. There were splotches of red all around the fire. It was like someone had spilled red paint all around. It was strange. Why would someone bring paint out here to the middle of the woods? I stalked around the other side of the fire looking for the answer to this mystery. Unfortunately, I found it. There was something pale sitting just outside the burnt grass of the fire. It was next to a splotch of red. I bent down and moved the grass to see more clearly. Picking it up, I saw it was a severed human toe. I dropped it and stood up like a shot. The red splotches made sense to me now. They weren't paint, they were blood. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt very alone and surrounded. My eyes darted all around the clearing and into the trees as I did a slow circle, searching for whatever was about to attack. As I searched, I saw the red splotches led off into the woods in the opposite direction of the trail. Curiosity tried to get me to follow, but I told it to shut the hell up and hightailed it out of there, my head on a swivel searching for threats. Just as I was about to reach the main trail, I literally ran into the bear. I'd been so busy watching behind me for whatever might be chasing me that I didn't see what was in front of me. It turned to face me, showing its red teeth. Then it stood on its hind legs, dwarfing me, and roared. I wished I'd worn the brown pants because I soiled myself in fear. I was so terrified I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. It dropped back down onto its front legs and approached me, teeth bared. I knew right then it was responsible for the screams and the dismembered toe. The only thing I couldn't figure out was the fire. I'd never heard of bears being able to start a fire. This was unfortunately the last thought going through my head before being eaten. It sniffed and took a step back. If I'd known dropping a load in my pants would save me, I would have done it last night. As I looked into the eyes of my death, it wasn't looking back at me. It was looking past me. I wasn't sure what kind of trick this bear was pulling. It wasn't like it had to fool me or anything. It had me dead to rights. Curiosity made me turn and follow the bear's gaze. I instantly regretted it. Standing near the clearing was a monster. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It stood on hind legs, at least 8 feet tall. It had the horns of a deer, but the face looked like a deer's skull with no skin on it. Its shoulders were covered in what looked like a cloak made of another animal's skin. The bear let out a deep growl full of menace. I took the opportunity to back away and allow the bear a clear path to its adversary. It glanced at me for a moment, then started toward the monster. As soon as it was past me, I dropped my pack and ran down the trail with every ounce of speed I could muster. It didn't matter that my car was miles away. It didn't matter there was no way I could sprint all the way there without collapsing and having a heart attack. Just then I heard the fight. The growling, roaring, slashing, knocking trees down. Fight that would have been awesome to watch, from inside a bunker with 2-foot-thick concrete walls. Just me, alone, without a rocket launcher to defend myself. There was no way I was sticking around. I ran for a solid 10 minutes before the stitch in my side told me I had to at least slow to a walk. I didn't dare stop. I knew I had to keep moving. It was my only chance of surviving by some miracle. The sounds of the fight echoed throughout the trees, making it seem surreal to hear it, then hear it echo back again. It sounded like the fight was slowing down. I hoped it would last for a while longer. Maybe, whichever one would forget about me or be too tired to track me down. My walk had become a limp. I was nearly out of energy and had a mile to go to the relative safety of my car. Surely by now I could take it easy. As the thought rolled through my brain, the sounds of the fight ceased. The fading echo was all that remained. I wondered which one had been victorious and comforted myself that the victor was surely enjoying the spoils by feasting on the fallen adversary. But in the back of my mind, unease grew. What if it didn't forget me? What if it was following me right now? I found myself walking a little faster, much to the pain and chagrin of my legs. The silence that fell in the aftermath of the fight was disconcerting. The animals around me that had been chattering away, suddenly falling silent, was alarming. I started jogging, each step a new exercise in pain. There was no doubt I was being followed. The footsteps behind me were getting louder by the moment. My car was in sight. I was almost free. The footsteps behind me were very loud now. I knew it was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Run. Don't think. Just run. My thoughts screamed at me. Even my curiosity had no desire to look back. 10 steps from the car, I dug in my pocket looking for my keys. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't find them. Then I dug a little deeper and came away with my prize. I hit the remote to unlock the car and dove into the driver's seat. The engine had just roared to life when the monster appeared. I threw the car in reverse and stomped on the gas, whipping around and making the monster miss crashing through the windshield. I jammed it into drive and floored it as the monster recovered and started after me. For a long, horrid moment, it seemed to be catching up to me. The road was gravel and had several potholes in it. I found myself swerving to miss the biggest ones so my car wouldn't bottom out. But by doing so, the monster gained ground. It was almost within reach of my rear bumper when I slid sideways onto the main road. Once on the pavement, I floored it and watched with satisfaction as the monster fell behind. I breathed a sigh of relief as I relaxed and settled in for the ride home. It wasn't long until I was pulling into my driveway and parking. My head fell back against the headrest, and I was tempted to take a nap right there when my nose reminded me of the state of my pants. Walking in empty-handed was a mixed blessing. I'd left hundreds of dollars in equipment behind, but at least I was alive. My shower called to me. I stripped, threw my pants and underwear in the trash, then settled into the longest, most rewarding shower of my life. After drying, I threw on a Metallica t-shirt and a pair of shorts. I came back out to the living room and settled in to watch a movie. Horror was out. I knew I'd have nightmares for weeks about my ordeal. I decided to watch an episode of Wipeout. 3 episodes later, I found my eyelids fighting gravity and exhaustion. Heading to bed, I turned out the lights and stepped up to the living room window. Looking out over the lights of town, I sighed, seeing the trees of the park far in the distance and knowing I'd never visit there again. Before I turned toward my bedroom, something caught my eye. It was impossible. I rubbed my eyes to be sure. The monster was creeping out of the woods and coming straight toward my house. As I watched, it looked up and saw me. Our eyes locked. Mine full of fear, its full of menace. I ran through the house making sure every door and window was locked. After that, I went on my bedstand and pulled out my snub nose .38, checking to make sure it was loaded and grabbing a handful of extra bullets, shoving them in my pocket. Running back out to the living room, I looked out the window, but it was gone. Pressing my face against the glass, I searched the front yard, but it wasn't there. For an instant, I wondered if my imagination had been playing tricks on me. I went to the kitchen window and looked into the backyard. It was dark, and I couldn't see much. Reaching for the light switch, I hesitated, not wanting to see it suddenly appear in front of me. But I had to know if this thing was real or not. I would rather that I was going crazy than ever see that thing again. Flicking on the light, I took a half step back. Nothing was there. I scanned the entire backyard, all the way to the woods that bordered my property. Nothing. I shrugged and was about to go to bed when I heard it. My foot stopped on the first step, and I turned back toward the door. Someone or something was scraping against the front door. Feeling like I was in a trance, I was drawn to the door. Leaning up to the peephole, I closed my eyes and breathed a silent prayer that nothing would be there. My prayers were answered. There was nothing out there. As tempted as I was to just accept this audible hallucination, my shaking hand reached for the doorknob. The distance between my hand and the door seemed to fade, like one of those scenes in a horror movie where the camera zooms in while going backward. I turned the knob and held my breath while opening the door. Nothing was there. I released a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Looking around, the yard was empty, just the evening mist clinging to the lawn. My imagination had gotten the best of me. I turned to go back inside and saw the door and door frame had long scratches on it. My blood froze. It was real. It was here. It had tracked me down. As terror gripped me, I saw a flash of brown for an instant before it charged me. In sheer desperation, I fell back into the door just as it hit the door frame. Its antlers slammed into the door frame, sending splinters flying as it struggled to get loose from the destroyed wood. I lay on the door, watching in grim fascination, stunned by the fact that it had missed gouging my eyes by a mere fraction of an inch. The doorway had saved me. The same doorway that was rapidly disappearing under the monster's onslaught. I regained myself and ran. As I darted through the living room, somehow, I had the presence of mind to grab the house phone and dial 911 as I headed down the basement steps, slamming the door behind me. 911, what's your emergency? Came the lady operator's voice. I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me, I said, vaulting down the stairs. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me. Are you talking about a person? No. What do you not understand about the word monster? I shouted. All right, it's my duty to inform you that prank calls will be reported to the police and you could face charges. Fine, said the cops. Maybe they can fight off the monster long enough to put me in cuffs. The line disconnected. Son of a... I said as I heard the monster stalking around inside the house. I squeezed myself into the far corner between the wall and the oil tank and tried to be as quiet as possible. Barely breathing, I listened to its measured steps as it crept from room to room. The floorboards complained with loud creaks, telling me this thing weighed considerably more than me. I heard it turn toward the stairs and thought about making a run for the cellar door that led outside when my phone rang. Hello, I screamed, trying to be as quiet as possible. Is this the person who just called 911 about a monster? Yes, who is this? There was a pause as I heard the footsteps change direction. I'm from another agency, he said. Could you describe the monster for me? So you're from one of those 3-letter agencies that always say they don't spy on our phone calls? Could you describe the monster for me? It's huge, I whispered. At least 8 feet tall, covered in fur, and wearing the fur of another animal over its shoulders. Oh, and it has antlers like a deer. I heard a sharp intake of air. Where is it? I gave him my address. I meant where is it in the house? It's on the 1st floor and I'm in the basement, I whispered. But I think it's coming down here. Just then I heard the basement door open. Gotta go, I whispered, then hung up the phone. The basement stairs groaned under the weight. I hoped that the wood would collapse under the weight and it would fall, snapping its neck. No such luck. The stairs creaked as it continued to the bottom. I had to duck in this basement, so I was sure it was on all fours to keep from getting tangled in the rafters. My heart pounded. I struggled to keep my breathing quiet so I wouldn't give away my position. The chuffing of the monster's breathing was getting closer. I wanted to close my eyes but had to know when it came close enough. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gun. Aiming it at the corner, I waited. The skeletal snout appeared, but I didn't shoot. The shot would just bounce off of bone. I wanted to hit something more vital and hope that I might somehow survive. The rest of the bony skull made its appearance and went by without noticing me. Next came the neck and the rest of the body. I wasn't sure where this thing's vital organs were, so I held off, hoping that it might not notice me at all. Those hopes were dashed when it sniffed, then whipped around and stared right at me. I took that as a sign to shoot it in the chest. The gunshot was deafening, especially in such a closed space. My ears were ringing so loud, I could barely hear the monster screaming and tearing my oil tank limb from limb, trying to get to me. I fired again, trying to hit any part of its body as oil flew from it, thrashing around. We were both covered in heating oil, and yet it still kept coming. 3 more shots didn't even slow it down. It was so close the muzzle of the gun was nearly touching it. I shoved the barrel in one of its eye sockets and pulled the trigger. The flame from the exploding gunpowder set the oil on fire. I don't know if it was that or the bullet bouncing around in its skull that made it shriek even louder. Flame engulfed its screaming form, making it look like a demon straight from hell. It ran out of the basement through the outside doors, bursting out into the open air and disappearing into the night. I was so relieved I didn't notice right away that I was on fire. The oil that had splashed on me had ignited when the monster caught fire. I tried to push my way out quickly, but the monster had shoved the tank closer to the wall, pinning me. The fire devoured the oil on my clothes and my bare skin, making me scream in agony as I tried in vain to get away from the fire. This was it. I would die this horrible, agonizing death, trapped in an inferno. The monster would get its revenge and not even know it. Maybe once it extinguished its own fire, it would come back and devour what was left of me like a well-done steak. I must have been hallucinating. I could have sworn a cloud enveloped me just before I died. Hashtag. I woke in a white room with an annoying beeping sound that wouldn't stop. There was a smiling face sitting in the corner staring back at me, attached to a man I'd never met. "How are you feeling?" he said, stepping over to the hospital bed. "Am I dead?" I rasped. "Not yet," he chuckled. "It was close though. If we hadn't gotten to you when we did, you would have been a shish kebab." I tried to lean up, but pain put me back in the bed. "Yeah, you're not going to be taking any hiking trips for a while," he said. "You've got burns all over your legs that'll need some time to heal." "I'm never going hiking again," I said. "Are you the guy I talked to on the phone?" "Yeah. Do you mind telling me the rest of what happened?" he said, pulling out a pen and notepad. "Sure," I said, shrugging. "Since you saved my life, it's the least I could do." He pulled his chair over and got comfortable. "What happened to the monster anyway?" I said. He hesitated. "It got away, didn't it?" "Yeah," he said, lowering his head a little. "We lost the trail after it extinguished itself, but don't worry, we'll find it." I didn't comment on my opinion of the competency of government agencies out of respect for the man who saved my life, but suffice it to say I wouldn't be sleeping very deeply once I got back home. "Where would you like me to start?" I said. "The beginning is always a good place." Second story. I was attacked while camping in the woods. I'm a 24-year-old man. I live in a rather remote and rural town in Michigan. I especially enjoyed going out in the forest near my small town. On one particular camping trip that I will never forget, I encountered something that made me question the true nature of reality. On one particular day around 6 years ago, I decided to go out in the nearby woods. It was the summer after I graduated from high school. The hardware store that I was working at went out of business a week prior to this story. Since I lost my job and I was bored, I decided to go on a 4-day shooting and camping trip. I packed up my shotgun that my grandfather gave to me for my 16th birthday. For food, I got some ramen noodles, a carton of eggs, graham crackers, and hot dogs. I also packed up a sleeping bag and a tent. So I got into my old pickup truck and drove to the forest. I parked in a nearby grassland, and I walked into the woods with my gear. It took me around 3 hours to find a perfect place to set up camp. I rested for another 2 hours before I decided to go find somewhere to fire off some rounds. I had this uneasy feeling that I was being watched. No matter how hard I tried, I could never shake it off. Sometimes I heard twigs snapping or footsteps behind me, but when I went to investigate, nothing was there. So I just went back to my business, putting up some used milk jugs as targets for me to shoot. I spent maybe an hour or two shooting my shotgun. Afterwards, I cooked up the ramen noodles for dinner. It got dark pretty quick, and I decided it was time for me to fall asleep. So I unfolded my sleeping bag and closed my eyes. As soon as I was fading off into sleep, I heard a deep demonic growl. I quickly grabbed my shotgun and loaded it, in preparation to defend myself. Suddenly, something slashed at my tent. The slash tore a very large hole in the tent's fabric. I respond by firing 3 shots at the intruder. The intruder let out a very high pitch and ear-piercing scream. The assailant screamed so loud that it drowned out the gunshots. Whatever attacked my tent scurried away in the other direction. I was too frightened and shaken up to give chase. My ears felt like they were bleeding, both from the thing's screams and gunshots of my shotgun. I spent the rest of the night sitting next to a tree with my shotgun in my hand. I did not get a good look at my would-be attacker due to how dark it was out. However, from the brief glimpse of the silhouette that I got, the figure seemed quite humanoid, but it definitely was not a human. That thing was also most certainly not a bear, as it was far too skinny and gaunt to be one. Whatever it was very thin to the point that it looked like someone who was severely malnourished. I don't know if my eyes were playing tricks on me or not, but I swore that the assailant had a coyote-like head. The morning came, and I investigated the area for any signs of my late-night visitor. For some strange reason, there wasn't any blood near my camp. I know for a certain fact that I actually hit that thing at nearly point-blank range. After walking around the area for a few minutes, I discovered some footprints. They were definitely bipedal, but not human. The footprints had 4 toes with very large dagger-like claw marks on each end. My guess is that they came from my little friend. I panicked and I decided it was time to leave. So I started to pack up all of my gear. The tent, due to it being too badly damaged to be useful from last night's attack, was simply left behind. I carefully scanned my environment for the creature. After I packed up all of my stuff, I started the long walk back to my truck. A camping trip just wasn't worth facing whatever that was. As I was walking, I carefully watched the environment around me. I scanned every body of water and every tree I could see for signs of that monster. There was always that unsettling feeling in my gut that I was being watched. What put me on edge the most was the forest was completely silent. Not a single bird was singing, or even an insect chirping. All the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. After nearly 3 hours of walking in the forest, I suddenly heard loud crunching noises coming from behind me. When I turned around to look, it was the same creature from the night before. The creature looked like a decomposing corpse, with its rib cage and internal organs visible. It had a rotting coyote-like head, but with ratty human-like head hair that touched its shoulders. The creature's claws were around 4 inches long. It was so skinny that it looked like it hadn't eaten anything for an entire month. It was mostly hunched over, but I think it would have been around 6 feet 2 inches tall, fully erect. Most chilling of all were its piercing eyes that seemed to stare deep into my soul. I fired another round at the creature with my shotgun, but this time it was unfazed. Realizing that my gun was now useless against the creature, my flight instincts took in and I ran for my life. Within no time, the creature ran right behind me. I felt the creature's heavy breathing on my neck. Just when all of my hope was lost, I saw my truck just across the grass. I was within yards of the forest's end. However, even with all of my adrenaline pumping, I was deeply fatigued and exhausted from all that running. Despite nearly fainting, I summoned enough energy to sprint to my truck. Just as I reached my truck, I felt a heavy blow hit the left side of my body. I was sent flying a few feet. When I landed on the ground, I ended up spraining my leg pretty badly. The creature walked over to me. It then grabbed my shirt's collar with one hand and hoisted me up in the air. I pulled out my knife and stabbed it in the face. The creature dropped me on the ground. I grabbed the shotgun and started beating the creature with the butt of my gun. After seeing me fighting back, the creature scampered back into the trees as if it had its tail between its legs. After the creature fled, I limped back to my truck. I put all of my gear in the truck's bed, climbed inside, and sped off as fast as I could. I never returned to that part of the forest again. Knowing that they wouldn't believe me, I also never told my family what happened. Third story. Camping trip with my dad. Something happened to me and my dad when we went on a camping trip a few years ago. I was around 12 years old at the time. We arrived at the campsite early in the afternoon and quickly set up our tent near a big lake. The air was crisp and fresh, and the trees surrounding us were tall and majestic. As the sun started to set, my dad built a campfire and began to cook some hot dogs on a grill. We sat on our camping chairs and enjoyed the warmth of the fire, listening to the sounds of nature around us. The stars slowly began to appear in the sky, and my dad pointed out some of the constellations he knew. After we finished eating, my dad told me to go to bed in the tent while he stayed outside to put out the fire. I crawled into my sleeping bag and closed my eyes, listening to the soothing sound of crickets outside. That's when I heard it. A soft whispering voice, right outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it got louder and more urgent. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the voice kept calling my name. I started to feel scared, so I called out to my dad, but he didn't answer. I crawled out of the tent and looked around, but I couldn't see anything in the dark. Then, I heard my dad's voice from across the lake. He was yelling for me to come to him. I could hear the urgency in his voice, and I knew I had to go to him. I started to run towards his voice, but the whispering voice behind me got louder and more frantic. I turned around and saw a shadowy figure chasing me. I screamed and ran faster, but it was like the figure was always right behind me. I didn't know what to do or who to trust. Finally, I made it to my dad, who was standing on the other side of the lake. He pulled me close and hugged me tightly, but something felt off. His embrace was cold and unfamiliar. When he pulled away, I saw that his face was different than I remembered. It was like he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were sunken and his skin was wrinkled. I tried to shake it off and convince myself that it was just the stress of the situation, but something felt off. As we packed up our things and left the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between my dad and me. He was quieter than usual, and there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. To this day, I'm not sure what happened to my dad, or if it's even my dad that I went home with. Every time I look at him, there's a sense of unease and uncertainty that lingers in my mind. Sometimes, I wonder if the shadowy figure that chased me in the woods had something to do with it, or if it was all just a nightmare. But I know one thing for sure, that camping trip was the last time I ever saw my dad as he used to be. Fourth story. Camping trip with my dad. Something happened to me and my dad when we went on a camping trip a few years ago. I was around 12 years old at the time. We arrived at the campsite early in the afternoon and quickly set up our tent near a big lake. The air was crisp and fresh, and the trees surrounding us were tall and majestic. As the sun started to set, my dad built a campfire and began to cook some hot dogs on a grill. We sat on our camping chairs and enjoyed the warmth of the fire, listening to the sounds of nature around us. The stars slowly began to appear in the sky, and my dad pointed out some of the constellations he knew. After we finished eating, my dad told me to go to bed in the tent while he stayed outside to put out the fire. I crawled into my sleeping bag and closed my eyes, listening to the soothing sound of crickets outside. That's when I heard it. A soft whispering voice, right outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it got louder and more urgent. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the voice kept calling my name. I started to feel scared, so I called out to my dad, but he didn't answer. I crawled out of the tent and looked around, but I couldn't see anything in the dark. Then, I heard my dad's voice from across the lake. He was yelling for me to come to him. I could hear the urgency in his voice, and I knew I had to go to him. I started to run towards his voice, but the whispering voice behind me got louder and more frantic. I turned around and saw a shadowy figure chasing me. I screamed and ran faster, but it was like the figure was always right behind me. I didn't know what to do or who to trust. Finally, I made it to my dad, who was standing on the other side of the lake. He pulled me close and hugged me tightly, but something felt off. His embrace was cold and unfamiliar. When he pulled away, I saw that his face was different than I remembered. It was like he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were sunken and his skin was wrinkled. I tried to shake it off and convince myself that it was just the stress of the situation, but something felt off. As we packed up our things and left the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between my dad and me. He was quieter than usual, and there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. To this day, I'm not sure what happened to my dad, or if it's even my dad that I went home with. Every time I look at him, there's a sense of unease and uncertainty that lingers in my mind. Sometimes, I wonder if the shadowy figure that chased me in the woods had something to do with it, or if it was all just a nightmare. But I know one thing for sure, that camping trip was the last time I ever saw my dad as he used to be. Fifth story. There's only 5 of us on this camping trip. We keep counting 6. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space, faint but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school, and we're celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them, hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother, as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So Dave had went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag, while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly, and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working, as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning in frustration except 4. It's all right, I'll get the chair myself, Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. How many people are here? I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. There's 5, right? I mean, there's 5 chairs, Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair, I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head-on, and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. Yeah, that sounds about right actually, Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty. One for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep-deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. Who started the fire? I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. Wasn't it you, Dave? Eric asked. Dave shook his head. I think the person standing behind Jenny did it, Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. Wait, I don't know, Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide, and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. I think we should leave this place, Ava stuttered. Yes, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it, Dave said. But it's so dark out in the forest now. We'd probably get lost if we leave now, someone else said. Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow, Eric agreed. I tried to protest but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. Let's not sleep in our separate tents just to be safe, Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought 1-person tents with us, but we could squeeze 2 if we tried. That way no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave and Sally like always went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here? Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent while the four outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in a sort of U shape so we could sleep as close as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go to help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put a brave face on for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it, his head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it with the blue fabric, now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny, please," he said. I hesitated, but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder, while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my rib cage and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. Asterisk. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm going to check why the person in my back seat has been so silent the whole time.